Welcome to the Plain Books Podcast. So I want you to picture this scenario for a second. You're fast asleep. It's the middle of the night.
Right.
And you are surrounded by just the absolute freezing stillness of the desert. Like if you've never been to the deep desert, the temperature drop at night it's staggering.
Oh, it really is. It goes from boiling to freezing so fast.
Exactly. So the warmth of your bed is literally the only comfort for miles in any direction. And then, bam, suddenly you are jolted awake by this fiery, agonizing pain.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's a scorpion sting. But you manage to soothe the wound, the panic subsides, and you eventually drift back to sleep. But then it happens again.
Oh, man.
Yes, way. Like 3 or 4 times in a single night, you are woken up by this blinding, searing venom just entering your bloodstream.
That is genuinely terrifying.
Right. But here is the truly suspenseful, almost unbelievable twist to this whole nightmare. As you investigate, you eventually discover that you are actually the only one in the entire camp getting stung.
Wait, really? The
Yep.
only one?
The only one. And why? Because your closest companion, your assigned protector, has been intentionally gathering 10 to 12 live scorpions from the dunes and hiding them in your bed while you sleep.
I mean, that genuinely sounds like the premise of a psychological thriller.
Right, it does.
The ultimate betrayal by a trusted guardian. Like when you hear a story like that, your immediate assumption is malice, just pure evil.
Of course it is.
But the reality of that situation and the specific biological and, I guess, psychological mechanics behind it, it completely upends how we typically think about protection, trauma, and resilience.
And that visceral, almost shocking memory is exactly where we are starting this episode. Because today, we are exploring this book, My Story, 50 Memories from 50 Years of Service, by Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum.
Such an incredibly fascinating text.
It really is. Our mission for this podcast is to explore the incredibly vivid personal memories of a man who, helped transform Dubai from a bustling yet fairly modest port into a global economic titan.
Yeah, the transformation is just unparalleled.
But before we get into the sweeping history, the international relations, and the building of modern nations, I have a challenge for you, the listener. I want you to treat this episode not just as a recount of historical events, but really as a mirror.
I like that. A mirror.
Yeah, ask yourself how these raw, practical lessons on extreme resilience and human compassion apply directly to your own family dynamics, your own career trajectory, and, your personal growth.
Because that is really the crucial lens for this memoir. The philosophies contained within these pages aren't abstract political theories developed in some sterile academic environment.
Right, sitting in an ivory tower.
Exactly. They are forged in sand, in salt water, and in the really severe physical realities of a leader's formative years. The environment dictated the philosophy.
So let's examine that scorpion story in detail because it sets the baseline for the author's entire worldview, right?
Right.
The companion who was putting the scorpions in his bed was a man named Humaid.
Humaid, right.
Now, Humaid was a Bedou. And to fully grasp this, you have to understand that the Bedouin don't just live on the desert. They survive by possessing this intimate metabolic relationship with the landscape.
Yeah, they are nomadic tribes who have navigated the absolute extremes of the Arabian Peninsula for centuries.
Right. So when the young Muhammad found the scorpions and realized what Humaid was doing, he was obviously furious. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Oh, completely justified fury.
But Humaid wasn't torturing him. He was systematically, intentionally building the boy's biological immunity to the deadly venom of the region.
And we should look at the mechanics of what Humaid was actually doing there, because the desert is entirely unforgiving. Humaid understood a fundamental truth, which is he could not shield this boy from the desert forever.
No matter how hard he tried.
Exactly. If the young Muhammad was going to survive and eventually lead these people, he had to become physically adapted to the very elements that could kill him. The pain was a localized, controlled exposure to a deadly reality. I mean, Humaid would sit calmly by the fire, take the agonizingly painful sting from the boy, and place hot ash directly on the wound to absorb the poison.
Wow. Just hot ash right on the sting.
Yeah. So he administered the pain, but he also administered the immediate cure. He was teaching the boy's immune system to recognize the threat and teaching his mind how to survive the aftermath of a strike.
And it actually worked. To this day, the author notes he is completely immune to scorpion venom.
That is just wild to me.
I know. And from this agonizing childhood ordeal, he extracts this incredibly profound philosophy, which is, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, not all that hurts you is evil, Sometimes pain teaches us and protects us.
Yeah, pain as a teacher.
And I can't help but look at that and immediately contrast it with the dominant parenting and leadership culture we see today.
Oh, 100%. It's night and day.
Think about modern helicopter parenting, or the intense urge to bubble wrap our kids, our employees, even ourselves. We spend massive amounts of energy trying to anticipate and completely eliminate every single scorpion from the path.
We really do. We want zero friction.
Exactly. Zero discomfort, zero potential for failure.
But that assumes that safety and strength are the exact same thing, which, biologically and psychologically they are not.
Right.
Biological immunity, muscular strength, psychological resilience, they are all anti-fragile systems. They literally require stressors to grow.
You don't use it, you lose it.
Precisely. If you put a muscle in a cast, it doesn't stay safe, it atrophies. By removing all the scorpions, you aren't making someone safer, you are ensuring that the first unexpected sting they encounter in the real world will be fatal, because they have zero antibodies.
So the harshness was a gift. But it's vital to note that this harshness wasn't isolated. He was subjected to the severe realities of the desert, yes, but he was simultaneously enveloped in a deeply perceptive, incredibly loving family environment.
Which is such an important balance.
Exactly. And that balance between the harshness of the world and the safety of a home is beautifully captured in his relationship with his mother, Latifa.
Oh, she is such a fascinating figure.
She is described in the memoir as this enchanting figure, the absolute light of his father's life. I mean, she could shoot a rifle better than most men, ride horses flawlessly, and possess this deep knowledge of herbal medicine.
A true force of nature.
Totally. People would travel massive distances across the desert just to be treated by her. But the story that really reveals her true genius as a mother revolves around his little cave.
Ah, yes, the Zabil Palace Menagerie. This is where we really see the early formation of an analytical mind.
Yeah. So young Mohammed had this insatiable, almost chaotic level of curiosity. He took over a small, sandy room in the west wing of the Zabil Palace, which was a room his father traditionally used for hunting falcons. And he transformed it into his own personal scientific laboratory.
And laboratory's doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Very loose definition of laboratory, because it was essentially a terrifying collection of desert wildlife.
Just absolute chaos.
He had wooden boxes stacked to the ceiling filled with live snakes of all species.
Ah, snakes.
He had live scorpions crawling around, he had seashells, and the literal rotting skeletons of fish he had dragged back from the beach to study.
It is the ultimate unfiltered childhood sanctuary. Deeply chaotic, highly unsanitary, and entirely driven by an urge to categorize the natural world.
But here is the catch. To house all these dangerous creatures, he had been secretly raiding his mother's kitchen and her personal belongings.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he was stealing her expensive jars and, most shockingly, her precious oud perfume boxes.
An oud is incredibly valuable.
Exactly. It's culturally significant. It's a luxury item. It's expensive. And this kid had just dumped out the precious perfume so he could use the ornate boxes as cages for his snakes and birds.
Just casually pouring liquid gold into the sand.
Right. So one day, his father comes to check on him, opens the door to this absolute house of horrors, and immediately calls his mother over to see what their son has done.
And for almost any parent, this is the moment the hammer drops.
Oh, big time.
Your child has stolen your valuables to hoard venomous reptiles. The instinct is immediate punishment. You shut down the room, you demand the expensive items back, and you lecture the child on respect for property.
But Latifa doesn't do that.
What?
They stand at the doorway, looking at the crawling scorpions, the fish skeletons, and the ruined perfume boxes, and they just start laughing.
They just crack up.
They laugh until they have tears in their eyes. And when Latifa finally catches her breath, she wipes her eyes and gently asks him if he could at least give her the outbox back, pointing out that the perfume he poured into the sand was worth significantly more than the feathers of the birds he was keeping in it.
I mean, the laughter is wonderful, but let's look at the mechanics of what she does next, because it is a masterclass in behavioral channeling.
Yeah, break that down for us.
She doesn't just tolerate this dangerous hobby. She validates the underlying impulse. Instead of confiscating his animals or grounding him, she goes out and buys him blank notebooks.
Blank notebooks.
Yes. She tells him to start formally recording his scientific discoveries. She tells him to document the species of birds, to sketch the shells, to write down the animal behaviors.
Wow.
She recognized that his destructive impulse wasn't malice. It was unguided scientific inquiry. By giving him the notebooks, she took a messy, dangerous childhood habit and channeled it into structured, analytical observation. She didn't crush his curiosity. She gave him the tools to be a thinker.
She gave him an infrastructure for his curiosity,
Hmm.
and her silent perception didn't stop there. There's another detail in the book that perfectly illustrates her quiet leadership.
The breakfast story, right?
Yes. Every morning, she would make him a breakfast of bread and eggs before he went to school. But the young Mohammed had a beloved horse, and he believed, in his childlike logic, that horses also needed bread and eggs to be strong.
Which is adorable, but probably not great for the horse.
Probably not. So every morning, he was secretly splitting his breakfast, feeding half of it to his horse on the way to school. Because of this, he was coming home in the afternoon absolutely ravenous.
And again, a lesser parent might have confronted him, demanded to know why he was starving himself, or scolded him for feeding human food to an animal.
Right, stop wasting food.
Exactly. But she simply observed the data. She saw he was hungry, she noticed the missing food, and she quietly deduced what was happening. Her response was not an argument. She simply started doubling his breakfast portion.
Just doubling it, no questions asked.
She provided enough for both the boy and the horse. He actually thought it was just a happy coincidence for years, only realizing as an adult that she had known his secret the entire time.
It's a pure example of providing the necessary resources for someone to succeed without ever demanding the credit for doing so.
Yeah, true servant leadership.
So we have a foundation being built here. We have a child learning physical resilience from the Bedu and learning analytical observation and deep empathy from his mother. But personal resilience is very different from the responsibility of protecting others.
Right, scaling that up is the hard part.
Exactly. How does that leap happen? According to the memoir, it happens by witnessing how his family responds when the ultimate catastrophic crisis hits.
The Great Storm of April 8th, 1961.
That's the one.
If you want to understand the author's standard for leadership, you have to analyze this event. Because, as he notes, times of crisis strip away all the theoretical boardroom ideas of leadership. A crisis forces you to act on pure, ingrained instinct.
And the build-up to this storm is incredibly tense. You have the elders of the community men who had lived through the era of his grandfather, men who knew the environment like the backs of their hands, sitting around noticing these subtle, deeply ominous changes.
They're reading the warning signs.
Yeah, they're essentially reading the deep data of the natural world. They see strange deep-sea fish washing up dead on the shore. They see algae blooming in areas where it shouldn't be.
It's like nature's alarm bells going off.
Exactly. The seagulls are massing together in unusual patterns. The desert cottontails and the Arabian bustard birds are acting erratically, fleeing inland. The elders start predicting something akin to the Day of Judgment.
But the young Mohammed doesn't quite buy it at first.
No, he's about 10 years old, looks at the calm, crystal blue sea, and essentially brushes off their doom-laden prophecies.
And that is the classic human bias against unseen threats. When the surface of the water is calm, it is incredibly difficult to believe the environment is about to completely turn on you.
It's hard to imagine the worst-case scenario when the sun is shining.
Exactly. But those elders understood that the surface is a lie. The truth of a storm is always found in the deep currents and the behavior of the wildlife, and their data was terrifyingly accurate.
The storm hits in the dead of night. He wakes up to what is essentially a full-blown hurricane tearing through the family home.
Must have been deafening.
Oh, the wind is howling. Windows are slamming and shattering. The structural integrity of the house is actually threatened. It is absolute terrifying chaos. And over the roar of the storm, he hears his father, Sheikh Rashid, shouting for his sons.
Now this is the pivotal moment.
Right, because the instinctive reaction of any father of means in that situation would be to secure his family, to say, stay inside, stay away from the glass, stay safe. But Sheikh Rashid yells, Hamdan, Mohammed, your hands. He is calling for their physical labor.
I want to pause and dissect the specific leadership dynamic here because it completely upends traditional power structures.
Go for it.
In the midst of this horrific, deadly crisis, Sheikh Rashid did not stay in the safety of his palace to direct emergency services via radio. He gathered his family, launched fragile lifeboats into raging, violent waters, and sent his own sons and nephews out into the dark to rescue drowning people before he ordered anyone else to do so.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Sending your 10-year-old son into a hurricane to pull drowning people from the water sounds borderline reckless to modern ears. Wouldn't the strategic, logical move for a ruler be to preserve his line of succession and leave the rescuing to able-bodied guards?
Well, if you view leadership purely as a monarchy to be protected, yes, that is the logical move. But Sheikh Rashid viewed leadership as a binding contract of shared suffering with his people.
Shared suffering. That's a heavy concept.
It is. If the leader stays safe while the people drown, the contract is broken. You lose all moral authority. By sending his own bloodline into the deadliest waters first, he was proving that the people's lives were just as valuable as his own sons' lives.
Privilege didn't mean safety.
Exactly. Privilege, in his eyes, did not mean insulation from disaster. Privilege meant you assumed the highest possible risk. They were out there pulling terrified, drowning people from the water with their bare hands. They rescued roughly 500 people that night, amidst a staggering loss of life and absolute devastation.
And the aftermath hung over Dubai like a dark cloud for weeks. Empty buildings had to be rapidly converted into makeshift shelters. But the author reflects that seeing his father risk his own family marked him forever.
It's an unforgettable lesson in empathy.
It cemented this unbreakable rule. You cannot ask your people to endure something you are not willing to physically endure yourself. And you see this exact same ground-level empathy in his observations of the pearl divers.
Oh, the pearl divers. They are the perfect economic and physical illustration of this concept.
They really are.
It's vital to remember that before the discovery of oil and before the modern economic boom that Dubai is known for today, diving for pearls was the absolute lifeblood of the region. It was the primary macroeconomic driver.
The whole economy ran on it.
Yes, and the physical toll of that work is almost unimaginable today.
The memoir describes these men preparing for journeys to the seabed that lasted months. They didn't have scuba gear. They used heavy stones to sink themselves rapidly to the bottom.
Just holding their breath.
Right. They faced drowning, sheer exhaustion, and the terrifying physics of deep water pressure. The atmospheric pressure doubles every 10 meters you descend. The author describes divers being pulled back onto the dhows, completely asphyxiated.
And the ones who survived had it almost just as bad.
Yeah, the lucky ones, the ones who survived without drowning or getting the bends, their eardrums would literally rupture from the pressure.
Oh, man.
And the standard medical treatment for a ruptured eardrum at sea was horrific. They would heat a piece of iron in a fire until it was red hot and place it directly against the exposed, bleeding eardrum to cauterize the wound and speed the healing.
The pain must have been blinding.
The young Mohammed would hear the agonizing screams of these men enduring this brutal treatment.
It is visceral, horrific trauma endured for the sake of basic economic survival. But the author makes a point to not just focus on the suffering.
There was a flip side to it.
Exactly. He also documents the profound spirit of cooperation among the crew and the immense culturally defining celebrations when the boats finally returned to shore. It was a massive event.
The whole community would come out.
An army of women and children would be waiting on the white sand, celebrating the survival of their fathers and the harvest that would feed them for the year.
And the young Mohammed would sit on that white sand, running his fingers through it, looking at the sea, and praying to God to give him the capacity to serve these people one day.
That's a profound shift in perspective.
It is. He wasn't looking at them as subjects to be taxed or ruled. He was looking at them as humans enduring immense hardship that he felt a duty to alleviate.
And this leads to a defining conclusion about the nature of governance. The author explicitly rejects the concept of the bird's-eye view leader.
The guy in the corner office.
You know, the executive who sits in a corner office, looking down at abstract spreadsheets and moving pieces on a board without ever stepping foot on the factory floor.
Right, totally detached from reality.
He argues that a true leader must be on the ground. They must feel the exact same sand, the same heat, and the same salt on their skin. You cannot possibly change a systemic issue for the better if you do not understand the minute, agonizing details of the suffering involved.
So we have a leader forged by the empathy of the Great Storm and the suffering of the pearl divers. But what happens when that deeply ingrained, localized empathy is forced to step onto the glittering, highly theatrical global stage?
That's where things get complicated.
It leads to a stark clash of philosophies. And this brings us to a fascinating contrast outlined in the memoir, the illusion of thrones versus the reality of economics.
This is a crucial pivot in the narrative. We move from the brutal physical realities of the desert and the sea into the often deceptive, highly curated world of geopolitics and statecraft.
Exactly. So the year is 1971. The author is attending the massive 2500th anniversary celebration of the foundation of the Persian Empire.
A huge, huge event.
It is held in the ancient city of Persepolis, and it is a spectacle of unprecedented opulence. We are talking about heads of state from all over the world, massive catering operations flown in from Paris, an absolute flex of wealth and power.
They really pulled out all the
They
stops.
did. The Shah of Iran is sitting on the legendary peacock throne, wearing a jewel-studded crown. It is the absolute cinematic pinnacle of monarchical power. But the author, sitting there observing this grand theater, has a profound realization.
He sees right through it, doesn't he?
He does. He looks at the peacock throne, and he thinks of his father, Sheikh Rashid. He realizes he could never, under any circumstances, imagine his father sitting on a golden throne with a crown on his head.
It just doesn't fit the man who sent his kids into a hurricane.
Right. His father was simply too close to the earth, too deeply entwined with the common people to ever engage in that kind of elevation.
And the author writes a very telling line here. He notes, "Dominion belongs to God alone. Greatness belongs to God alone. No flaunter shall last forever."
Wow. No flaunter shall last forever.
He didn't view the peacock throne as a symbol of enduring, unshakable strength. He viewed it as a dangerous illusion. He understood that when a leader elevates themselves that far above the people, they lose the ground-level data required to actually govern.
They lose touch?
And historically, his skepticism was warranted. He reflects on how, over the previous decades, several monarchies in the region that seemed absolutely immutable had collapsed almost overnight.
Now, I want to pause here and make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Throughout this memoir, the author references several major historical and geopolitical events: the fall of various monarchies, the geopolitical and economic rise of China, the devastating civil war in Beirut. As your hosts, we are remaining strictly impartial.
Absolutely neutral.
We are not taking political sides, nor are we endorsing specific geopolitical viewpoints or foreign policies. Our goal for this episode is simply to impartially report on the content provided in the text of this book, My Story 50 Memories from 50 Years of Service, by Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and to explore the author's personal philosophy regarding economic development versus political grandstanding.
Absolutely. The focus is entirely on the mechanics of his philosophy. And that philosophy, passed down directly from Sheikh Rashid, was heavily focused on practical, tangible development over political noise.
Yes, and Sheikh Rashid imparted 3 timeless lessons to his son that defined Dubai's trajectory.
Let's break those 3 lessons down, because they are incredibly actionable for anyone listening.
Okay, the first lesson was never stop learning. And Sheikh Rashid didn't just offer this as a platitude, he institutionalized it. From the very beginning of his rule in 1958, he established dedicated advisory councils.
But crucially, he didn't fill these councils with career politicians or sycophants.
No, he filled them with the people actually doing the work: traders, merchants, builders, engineers, and intellectuals. He explicitly told his son, "A man does not stop learning. We want them to help us build Dubai. We want them to teach you how to be a leader."
Consider how rare that is. It is a profound admission of vulnerability from a sovereign ruler.
It takes a lot of confidence to admit you don't know everything.
Exactly. He is explicitly stating, "I am not perfect, I do not possess all the answers, and I require the minds and practical expertise of others to complete my own vision." He recognized that a leader who isolates themselves in an echo chamber of their own brilliance is leading completely blind.
Which flows perfectly into the second lesson.
Yeah.
Avoid sycophants. The absolute danger of surrounding yourself with people whose only job is to agree with you.
The yes men.
The author compares it to the fairy tale of the emperor's new clothes, where leaders become so addicted to flattery and so blinded by their own pride that they literally cannot see the naked truth of their own failures.
We see this pathology constantly in modern corporate environments. The CEO who demands only good news, who fires dissenters, and who surrounds themselves with people who just nod and smile.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Sheikh Rashid warned against this entirely. There is a great story in the book where Sheikh Rashid is praising a particular council member's leadership abilities. The young Mohammed leans in and whispers to his father that he actually doesn't think the man is that efficient or effective.
The little youthful critique.
Right, and his father's reply is brilliant. He says that a successful ruler's most important quality is not doing everything perfectly themselves, but rather surrounding themselves with strong leaders and, more importantly, nurturing those leaders' flaws into strengths.
He said, "It is our duty to create leaders, to develop their talents, give them responsibility, and encourage them to become genuine leaders."
Yes.
The worst possible scenario, whether you are running a country, managing a business, or raising a family, is to be the one and only competent leader in the room. You have to invest your time in ambitious young people.
And that brings us to the third lesson, which is arguably the defining doctrine of Dubai's modern history: economics over noise.
Economics over noise.
When the young Mohammed asked his father who the true leaders in the world were, Sheikh Rashid didn't point to the loudest politicians or the most aggressive generals. He replied that today's real leaders are the silent giants who possess the economic power, not the politicians who make the noise.
The silent economic giants.
Hmm.
The book notes that economics always, inevitably, drives politics. The author looks at the global stage today, noting how certain nations build immense, undeniable international influence, not through aggressive military expansion, but through unparalleled, methodical economic strength.
It's a much more sustainable form of power.
Right. Sheikh Rashid deeply believed that avoiding messy political entanglements and the endless babble of politics was essential for survival. He preferred to focus all his concentration, all his capital, and all his time on development projects. Ports, infrastructure, trade routes, actively avoiding overt political confrontations.
It's a laser-like focus.
Now, I have to step in and push back on this a little
I
bit.
figured you might.
I mean, I hear this philosophy focus purely on the economy, ignore the noise of politics, and part of me thinks, is that actually realistic? Politics seems inevitable. Human beings are inherently messy. Factions naturally form. Egos inevitably clash over resources.
They certainly do.
To entirely avoid the babble of politics and maintain a laser-like focus on economic development requires an almost superhuman level of discipline from an entire leadership team. It requires every single person at the top to completely subjugate their personal egos. How often does that actually happen in human history?
You're right to be skeptical because it goes against almost every natural human instinct regarding power and recognition. The instinct is to grab the crown.
Exactly.
But what's fascinating is that the author provides a historical, documented example of exactly that kind of superhuman restraint. This philosophy of completely abandoning political ego culminated in one of the most unlikely and high-stakes political experiments in the modern world. It is the story of the birth of a nation inside a tent.
The Northern Tent.
Yes.
We are talking about the year 1968. To understand the stakes, we have to establish the context. At the time, this region was known as the Trucial States. It was essentially a collection of individual sheikdoms that had operated under protective treaties with the British government since the 19th century.
But in 1968, the British announced they were pulling out.
Right. The security umbrella was collapsing. These scattered tribes were suddenly facing a massive power vacuum, surrounded by much larger established nations. They needed to unite to survive.
The pressure must have been immense.
So, a meeting is called. The setting is cinematic. Two men meeting in the middle of the deep desert, far away from prying eyes, away from international press, away from any advisors who might want to sabotage the negotiations for their own gain.
Just the two of them.
It's Sheikh Rashid of Dubai and Sheikh Zayed of Abu Dhabi. They pitched two tents, a southern tent for their entourages to wait in, and a northern tent where the two leaders met entirely alone.
The author, who was a young man at the time, was tasked with physically preparing the camp. He describes the visceral experience of lighting a fire for cooking outside the tent, while a different kind of fire burned in his heart.
He knew how important this was.
He knew he was witnessing a pivot in history. The two sheiks entered the northern tent to discuss the impossible, uniting these independent tribes into a single federal nation.
Now, think about how these things normally go. If you compare this to a high-stakes corporate merger between two massive independent companies, usually the CEOs are fighting tooth and nail in the boardroom.
Oh, yeah. Egos flaring, lawyers everywhere.
They are deploying lawyers. They are arguing over who gets to be the ultimate CEO of the new merged entity whose name goes first on the letterhead, who controls the board. But in the northern tent, the exact opposite dynamic played out.
It was entirely unprecedented. Both men actively declined the presidency.
Wait, they both said no.
Yes. They were essentially fighting to give the ultimate, absolute power to the other person. Sheikh Zayed asked Sheikh Rashid to be the president. Sheikh Rashid smiled, calmly moved his Tazabur prayer beads through his fingers, and responded, "You are the president."
That is wild.
They went back and forth, engaging in long, earnest discussions, not fighting to claim the crown, but trying to bestow it upon the other out of profound mutual respect and a shared vision for the survival of their people.
Eventually, Sheikh Zayed agreed to take on the heavy mantle of the presidency, and Sheikh Rashid granted him his full, unwavering blessing.
A true partnership.
In that tent, they agreed on one common flag, one unified healthcare system, one shared education system. They completely abandoned their personal egos to fulfill the hopes of an entire society. The author reflects on this moment 50 years later with a deep ache in his heart for other countries in the region that have squandered millions of lives and billions of dollars simply because their leaders were too busy jostling and fighting for personal power to build anything lasting.
And the memoir draws a devastating contrast here to highlight the true, blood-soaked cost of that political ego.
It's a grim comparison.
The author explicitly mentions the 1975 civil war in Beirut, Lebanon. He watched a beautiful, vibrant, culturally rich city descend into a merciless 15-year conflict driven by factional politics.
And the numbers are staggering.
The statistics he provides in the text are chilling. More than 150,000 people killed, twice that number permanently maimed, and an estimated $25 billion in sheer economic destruction.
He distills that tragedy into a terrifyingly clear thesis. If you want to destroy a state from within, shake its political stability. If you want to change the narrative, to spread fear and redefine loyalties, then go after political stability. Creating a state through the peaceful humility of the Northern Tent was a genuine miracle, but keeping it stable, defending it against the kind of internal factions and external chaos that destroyed Beirut would require immense, highly organized strength.
And that brings us to the most significant shift in the author's own life. The monumental task of defending this newborn union, this fragile, unprecedented agreement forged in a tent, was about to fall squarely on his young shoulders.
Let's talk about the weight of that shield.
Yep.
We are exploring his coming of age. Before he is handed this massive military responsibility, we see him studying abroad in Cambridge.
Cambridge, right.
And remember the context. He is the son of a ruler, a man of significant means back home. He could easily be living a life of absolute luxury in the UK. But his father, Sheikh Rashid, is playing a very long, very strategic game with his son's education.
Because Sheikh Rashid understood deeply that true education isn't just about the lectures you attend in a classroom.
It rarely is.
It's about understanding the mechanics of the real world, and that starts with understanding the absolute value of money. So he sends his son to Cambridge, but he deliberately restricts his funds. He only sends him an allowance of £2 a week.
£2 a week in the 1960s. The author notes that this meager amount wasn't even enough to cover his basic meals for the weekdays. He was eating chicken exactly once a week.
Just once a week.
And because he had this deep, abiding passion for horse racing, he would routinely skip lunch altogether just so he could afford to buy a coffee for his friends or save up enough coins to buy a cheap train ticket to go watch the races. He was out there shoveling snow and doing part-time manual labor just to fund his trips to the track.
It's a brilliant pedagogical strategy by his father.
Tough love.
Very tough. As the author notes, his father accomplished multiple goals simultaneously, forcing him to immerse himself and learn English fluently, while completely stripping away the insulation of royalty. He forced his son to experience the reality of budgeting, the sting of hunger, and the necessity of working for what you want. He was ensuring his son never lost that ground-level perspective.
And then comes the abrupt pivot. He's in the UK, living this frugal student life, and he gets a phone call from his father that changes his trajectory forever.
The call that changes everything.
His father simply says, "We are holding a very important meeting," which, in the coded language of statecraft, meant, "Get home right now." He immediately jumps on the first available flight back to Dubai.
And when he arrives, his father delivers a single, staggering sentence that essentially ends his youth and begins his manhood. He tells him that the newborn union needs absolute protection from enemies, both within and without, and says, "Mohammed, we want you to be responsible for protecting the union."
Try to comprehend the gravity of that moment. He had read historical stories of young men leading armies, people like Usama bin Zaid, but he thought of them as ancient legends. Suddenly, he is a young man in his early 20s, and he is tasked with building a federal defense force completely from scratch to protect a country that barely exists on paper yet.
It is an overwhelming, crushing weight.
So let's look at the mechanics of how one actually prepares for a task of that magnitude. How do you build an army from nothing? He doesn't immediately start drafting military blueprints, buying imported tanks, or hiring foreign mercenaries.
No, his first move is completely unexpected.
His first move is profoundly introspective and deeply spiritual. He journeys to Mecca.
The description of this journey in the memoir is incredibly moving. He sits completely alone under the vast expanse of the stars in Mecca, seeking forgiveness and grace in total humility.
It's a very vulnerable moment.
It really is. He writes this beautiful, vulnerable poetry about the experience. "I have taken off the trappings of kings with trembling hands." trembling hands. He is acutely aware of his own mortal vulnerability and the terrifying scale of what he has been asked to do.
This is the ultimate antidote to the peacock throne we discussed earlier. In that moment, he realizes that vanity, delusions of grandeur, and believing in the supremacy of one's own limited power are fatal flaws for a military leader.
They blind you to the truth.
He acknowledges that while human beings must plan, strategize, and strive, ultimate success and protection come from a higher power. By deliberately stripping away his ego, by rendering himself intentionally small beneath the stars, he actually gains the profound clarity needed to tackle the immense administrative and military challenge ahead of him.
The whirlwind of panic and overwhelm in his mind calms down. And in that tranquility, he starts asking the right logistical questions.
Like what?
Like, what are the main geographic threats? How can a military force be built without completely bankrupting the fledgling nation's limited financial resources, which are desperately needed for civilian infrastructure? Who can he rely on to lead these units?
Real practical questions.
He begins to map out the future, day by day, year by year. He realizes the defense force has to be an organic extension of the local tribes, utilizing their inherent knowledge of the terrain.
This spiritual and practical grounding connects perfectly to a quote he references later in the text from Leonardo da Vinci. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
I love that quote.
To build a defense force simply and efficiently, you cannot act out of panic or a desire to show off. You have to first acquire a thorough, exhaustive understanding of the incredibly complex, nuanced threats. You have to comprehend the complex geopolitical facts before you can distill them into a straightforward, actionable plan that thousands of individual soldiers can execute flawlessly.
He had to master the complexity in order to lead with absolute simplicity.
And decades of carrying this immense responsibility. Decades of building ministries, defending borders, and governing a rapidly expanding population eventually crystallized into a very clear, highly actionable philosophy.
Which brings us to the culmination of our discussion of the source material.
Exactly. The 10 rules of leadership.
This is where the memoir bridges the historical narrative with immediate modern application. It's fascinating how it originates. It starts with a simple question posed on social media.
Right. A follower on Twitter asks him, "Your Highness, if you were to write the 10 commandments of government administration addressed to an official in the Arab world, what would they be?"
And his response to this question is rooted in a highly provocative, radical claim.
Which is?
He tweets back that the core crisis facing the Arab world today is not primarily a political crisis, it is an administrative one.
Wow.
He argues that the region needs highly competent administrators capable of bridging developmental gaps far more than it needs noisy politicians shouting from podiums.
Which perfectly echoes his father's early lesson about prioritizing economics over politics. So he lays out these 10 rules. And the very first rule is a fundamental, ground-up reorientation of how bureaucracy should operate. Rule 1. Serve the people.
Serve the people.
Now, I know that sounds incredibly simple, like a generic political campaign slogan, but the way he explains the mechanics of it is fiercely practical. He explicitly states that the sole purpose of government procedures, systems, and laws is to serve human beings.
They aren't sacred texts.
Exactly. He warns administrators, do not glorify the process, do not sanctify the laws, or operate under the delusion that systems are more important than the people they govern. They are tools invented to make lives easier, and if they fail to deliver that outcome, they can and should be ripped up and changed at any time.
This is a devastating, highly accurate critique of bureaucratic stagnation. In almost any large organization, many officials eventually start to believe that their primary job is to protect the system itself, to apply the law literally and rigidly, and to blindly implement established processes regardless of the human outcome.
They forget why the rule was made in the first place.
The author argues that this specific mindset is the root cause of administrative failure and societal decay. If legislators and administrators prioritize the human outcome over the rigidity of the process, it would spark a complete administrative revolution.
Let's ground this with an analogy because I think everyone listening has experienced this. Think about a bureaucracy like the scaffolding used to build a massive cathedral.
Okay, scaffolding.
The scaffolding is absolutely essential to get the heavy stones in place safely. But eventually, some administrators fall in love with the scaffolding itself. They start polishing the steel tubes. They start reinforcing the temporary walkways. They write complex manuals on how to climb the scaffolding. And they completely forget that the entire point of the structure was to build the church inside.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
When the process becomes a wall that traps people instead of a bridge that helps them, we've lost the plot entirely.
That is exactly the danger. The system becomes an idol to be worshipped rather than a tool to be utilized. And that theme of misplaced worship continues directly into Rule 2. Do not worship the position.
He writes that jobs, positions, and responsibilities are entirely temporary. Your real, enduring value is your work, your tangible achievements, and your character, not your fleeting title.
Because titles fade.
He warns that if you fall in love with your position, if your identity becomes tied to your corner office, you will never have the courage to make bold, necessary decisions because you'll be too terrified of losing your seat. You will end up putting the preservation of your own status above the values and principles you are supposed to serve.
And if we tie Rule 2 to Rule 9, we see the complete cyclical picture of his leadership philosophy.
What's Rule 9?
Rule 9 is create leaders. He argues that a real leader's primary metric of success is how many other leaders they build up. The making of leaders is a secret granted only to those who have completely overcome their own ego. Your greatest historical achievement is building capable people, not just constructing physical edifices or hoarding power and titles for yourselves.
Building people, not just buildings. It brings us right back full circle to Sheikh Rashid telling the young Mohammed that it is their absolute duty to create leaders. And finally, Rule 10. Go forth and live a meaningful life.
Rule 10.
He frames public service, and indeed any form of leadership, not as a heavy burden or a mere job to clock in for, but as a profound, rare blessing. It is the opportunity to actively change the lives of millions of people for the better. He tells administrators never to underestimate their role because they are fundamentally in the business of shaping human lives, planning the futures of children, and building nations.
It's an incredibly powerful synthesis of everything he learned throughout his life.
It really ties it all together.
From the harsh physical resilience taught by the scorpion stings in the desert, to the visceral, ground-level empathy forged during the Great Storm and observing the pearl divers, to the egoless, humble collaboration required inside the Northern Tent. It all culminates in a unified philosophy of service and administrative excellence.
It truly does. And as we bring this episode of the Playing Books podcast to a close, I want to return to that challenge I issued to you at the very beginning of our conversation.
The mirror.
The mirror. How do we take these historical reflections and let them actively enhance our own lives today? I challenge you to implement the Northern Tent mindset in your own world. Think about your family dynamics, your corporate environment, or your business partnerships. Where are you secretly fighting for the peacock throne?
Where is ego getting in the way?
Where are you letting your own ego and your desire for the top title or the most credit get in the way of unity and shared success? What would happen if you actively tried to elevate the people around you instead of constantly elevating yourself?
It requires a staggering amount of self-awareness to step back in the heat of the moment and say, the ultimate goal is vastly more important than my personal glory.
It's not easy.
But as the stories in this memoir demonstrate time and time again, that specific brand of humility is the absolute required architecture for lasting success.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. The author deliberately structured this memoir into 50 chapters to represent 50 years of service. If your own life was divided into chapters right now, how would you view the hardships written in your early pages?
That's a profound question.
Would your early pains, your failures, and your heartbreaks be seen merely as trauma and bad memories to be suppressed? Or with the benefit of time, reflection, and a shift in perspective, would you recognize them as the scorpions that intentionally built your ultimate immunity to the harshness of the world?
That is the ultimate reframe of personal history, recognizing pain not as a punishment, but as a protector.
If these stories and philosophies have resonated with you, I strongly urge you to go out and purchase this book, My Story, 50 Memories from 50 Years of Service by Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. We have explored some incredible moments today, but you have to read the rest of these 50 memories for yourself.
There is so much more in there.
You have to read his harrowing minute-by-minute account of the ordeal of Flight 404, the incredibly tense geopolitical maneuvers during the invasion of a brother nation, and his deeply personal, heartbreaking chapter on the greatest horse in the world, Dubai Millennium. It is an extraordinary, eye-opening read.
It really is a remarkable document. It serves as both a vulnerable personal diary and a blueprint for national evolution.
Furthermore, I highly encourage you to engage with the author directly on social media. Share your thoughts on his writing. Tell him which of his 10 rules of leadership hit home the hardest for your own career. And join the ongoing global conversation about building better communities and more effective systems.
It's a conversation worth joining.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and allowing us to share these stories with you. We warmly invite you to follow, subscribe, and share the Plain Books podcast with anyone in your life who needs a true masterclass in leadership, extreme resilience, and the power of living a deeply meaningful life. Until next time, keep reading and keep building.